public hearings are underway at the International Court of Justice in The Hague to examine Israel's obligations in connection with its activities in the occupied Palestinian territory. Since March the 2nd, Israel completely cut off all supplies to the 2.3 million residents of the Gaza Strip, and food stockpiled during a ceasefire at the start of the year has all but run out. A number of nations, including the US, Russia, South Africa and China, are set to deliver remarks at the ICJ throughout the week. For more on this, we now cross to SABC News correspondent William Denselow, who's in Brussels there for us. William, a very good afternoon to you. So bring us up to speed in terms of where procedures are at this stage. I mean, we know, of course, South Africa was one of those several countries that made their presentations, including saying that, accusing Israel of acting with impunity. Perhaps help us unpack some of those arguments made today by other countries too.
Absolutely. Well, in terms of where we're at, these hearings are expected to last the week. They kicked off on Monday morning, and we're expecting throughout the week to hear from roughly 40 or so countries to lay out their cases to the 15-member judge panel of the ICJ, the UN's top court. Now, perhaps putting it most concisely, well, certainly one of the most concise summaries that we've heard so far came from Belgium's representative, speaking a little earlier today, shortly before the lunchtime recess, when Belgium said that Israel must carry out its military activities in accordance with international law, not counter or contrary to international law. As you mentioned, we have heard from South Africa's representatives. We heard from three of those representatives speaking to the ICJ in an address that lasted a little under an hour. And essentially, one of South Africa's representatives, Jamie Hendricks, an advisor, a legal advisor on international law, laid out what South Africa wanted to see from Israel, as well as the United Nations and the international community. Looking briefly at Israel, well, they called for a ceasing of what he described as wrongful acts. He said he wanted to see action taken, including reparations. He said that Israel needed to comply with its obligations as an occupying power, and that includes providing the likes of food, medicine and water to Palestinians. Of course, as the humanitarian crisis has been exacerbated since Israel's decision to cut off military aid to the Palestinian enclave at the start of March.
And of course, not everybody is here on, opposed to Israel's stance. Just give us a sense then in terms of those that are pro-Israel, what are we likely to hear, and who is going to then be making those presentations? Anything you know at this stage?
Absolutely. I think all eyes will really be on what we hear from the United States tomorrow. They have, of course, historically been the staunchest of Israel's allies, and we've seen that play out at the United Nations over recent months. We've seen votes both in the United Nations Security Council, where the US has frequently used its power of a veto to block resolutions condemning Israel, and also in the United Nations General Assembly, when the US, along with just a handful of countries, have gone against the grain of the vast majority of the international community in their condemnation of Israel's actions. So all eyes will be on the United States' response, but of course they are certainly not alone. We're also expecting to hear this week from Hungary's representatives. Now, Hungary recently invited Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to their country, despite the International Criminal Court having issued an arrest warrant against Israel's Prime Minister, and that's particularly significant considering that Hungary is one country that is a signatory to the Rome Statute, which essentially obliges them to carry out ICC arrest warrants. So very interesting to see Hungary's response as well. When it comes to Israel directly, well, they are not set to present oral arguments this week. However, they have sent a written response condemning the actions of the court. We've also heard from the country's foreign ministry speaking this week. They say that the ICJ is being abused. They say it's being turned into a political tool to essentially deny Israel's right to self-defense.
As we wrap, William, and very quickly, importantly, of course, these hearings do come at the back of Israel completely cutting off all supplies to the 2.3 million residents of the Gaza Strip since March the 2nd. Just give us a sense of, on the ground, what are some of the examples that have been brought in to these hearings in terms of what's happening real time in Gaza?
Well, incredibly dire warnings we're hearing from the United Nations. The Secretary General describes them as killing fields. It's estimated that 9 out of 10 Palestinians don't have access to clean drinking water. The World Food Programme said last week said they had to cease operations of providing hot meals because of a direct result of those aid agency access cuts that we saw at the start of March. We heard from the Palestinian representatives directly on Monday. They showed images of babies that had to have limbs amputated as a result of Israeli strikes, they say. And we heard testimonies from doctors alleging that the babies in question didn't have as much as a single painkiller because of the lack of humanitarian aid and medical supplies into the Palestinian enclave. That is why South Africa's representative not only called for Israel to cease its activities when it comes to blocking aid, but also urges the UN to stand up for itself, also calling on other members of the international community to take further action and to condemn Israel's decision to block aid from entering Gaza.
All right, William, thank you so much for that. Let's leave it there for now. William Denselow in Brussels there for us, of course, monitoring those hearings at the ICJ.